You ever ask yourself why bad things happen to good people? Have you ever asked that? There was a lady that owned a parakeet, and she'd named it Chippy, and it was one of those that just chirped and sang and was the happiest bird. And Chippy the parakeet never saw it coming, sitting on its perch peacefully, and a moment later, everything blanked out. And what happened? The owner of that parakeet decided to clean the cage. And she was going to use her vacuum sweeper, stick the nozzle in, suck out all the loose feathers and the seeds. And just as she's sticking the nozzle in, the phone rang. She reached back to get the phone, and she said hello. And about that time, I heard a sound of and something sucked into that nozzle. It nearly stopped the machine. She gasped, looked back, and Chippy was gone. She dropped the phone and turned off the sweeper, unzipped the bag, and looked through all the debris and finally found Chippy. Chippy, its feathers had gone in all directions. Fact of the matter, it was pretty limp and lifeless, barely alive, covered in dust, and trying to get its breath, and she immediately turned and ran for the bathroom and turned the bathtub water on wide open, ice cold, and power washed Chippy. And like any good owner, turned around and found the hair dryer and turned it on and hit it with a blast of hot air. Poor Chippy, struggling. Chippy doesn't sing much anymore. I wonder why. Have you ever had a day like Chippy? Just a question. Here's what Job said in the 14th chapter, verse 1 of his writing. Man that is born of woman is a few days and full of trouble. Full of trouble. That means, folk, in life, there's going to be some bad things that are going to happen. And there are times in life when bad things hit us broadside and surprise us. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why, when you've tried to live right, suddenly your mate, your spouse, walks out the door with someone else? Why, when you've done your very best to live right, and the doctor looks across the desk and tells you that you have cancer? Why, when you've done everything you know to be proper in life and you're told that you've lost your job? Why, when you've done everything you know to do, you've tried to please God and you've done your best and you have a child that dies and you've got to bury your own flesh and blood? Why serve God? Why go to church? You say, Pastor, I've gone to church and I got hurt at church by Christian people. Well, if you'll be a little patient with me and you put your thinking cap on and try to think with me, I'd like to explain why bad things happen to good people through a biblical perspective. It was 586 BC, and a king by the name of Nebuchadnezzar. He was a Babylonian king, and he conquers the city of Jerusalem. He finds all the brilliant, bright intellectuals, and he takes them captive, and he takes them all the way back 1,000 miles to Babylon. Among them was 3 Hebrew boys by the name of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. If you want to memorize that, call it shake a bed, make a bed, to bed we go. It'll help you. That's what my teacher told me. And another one was Daniel, and there were many, many others. Now, I want you to understand something else. Daniel is turning 80 years of age. He had been down there in captivity in Babylon ever since he had been a teenager. And there's a message here. Even at 80 years of age, the devil begins to upset the life of Daniel. The devil never quits. I don't care if you're 8 or you're 80, the devil's always going to be fighting you, and you're going to be in a battle against the devil. That's why bad things happen to good people. 80 years of age, and the enemy's still fighting. Now get this. At this time, 80 years of age, he'd risen to leadership in the Babylonian government, but now the Medes and the Persian armies come and they conquer Babylon. They see that he's a natural-born, gifted, anointed leader. He's left in leadership, but some of the Mede-Persian leaders become jealous. Jealousy is an awful thing. And they began to try to find fault with Daniel, and they couldn't find any fault. And finally they said, we find fault with his God. And we've noticed that Daniel prays 3 times a day. He throws open the window and he prays toward Jerusalem, toward his God. They're angry about it and they're jealous. And you know what they did to Daniel? They put him in the den of lions. Bad things happen to good people. Now here's all I really want you to see. Not because he did anything wrong, but because he did that which was right. Sometimes even when you're pleasing God and living the right kind of life and haven't done a thing wrong, bad things can happen. Hardships will still come. When good times are happening, nobody's looking for God. But when the tough times come, that's when the only thing you can think about, where's God? And you start calling on him. And you begin to see that God begins to show up in the tough times of life when we're desperate. The poet said, I found him blooming where heartache's abundant rain. Who would have dreamed so much joy and so much pain? It's good on the mountain, but they come and they go. But it's down in the valley, there's always a rose. So I want you to know that hardships have revealed who God is more to me than all of the good times. You can literally seem to walk through hell itself, and God can give you a peace that nobody can even explain. I know I've been there. I know what it's like, 8.5 years, going every night to the nursing home to see the girl that had walked down the aisle and given herself to me in marriage. And now she didn't know me. And having a little city watch night after night after night. I know what it's like to have a boy with cancer, and for a year, driving him back and forth, back and forth, back and forth to the hospital. And every time you come back, he looks a little worse. And the doctors aren't sure he's going to make it. You find out really what you're made of, but really you find out how big God is and the peace that God can give you in that kind of a time. Why do bad things happen? Well, I can tell you why. God's trying to show himself to us, trying to show himself to you. He wants to encourage you. God keeps saying, keep right on walking. Keep on praising me. Keep on living right. It doesn't matter. They're going to see who God really is. Tony Evans said, when I was 10 years of age, he said, my daddy got saved. Said, my mother didn't like my daddy before he got saved. After he was saved, she hated him. And said she berated him and mocked him, humiliated him, discouraged him. And said, my daddy would get down on his knees and read his Bible, and she would say all kinds of derogatory things in front of the kids about daddy. He said one night about 2 or 3 in the morning, daddy was down on his knees. He had a Bible in front of him, and she came down the stairs, and she was so upset, and she looked at him and said a few things and then said, you know what? How can I find your God? And he said, my daddy led my mama to Jesus Christ. And mama turned around and said, led old Tony to Jesus. And then led my 2 brothers to Christ and led my sister to Christ. And you know something, folk? It's not in the good times that people are watching your reactions. It's in the adverse times they're looking on. Do you know why you're here? You're here to exalt Christ. No, I'm here to go to the movies. I'm going to make my life about pleasure. I'm here to buy a big home. I'm here to work a big job. No, you're here to glorify God. Don't miss that. You say, well, I'm a custodian. Yeah, you may be, but your main job is to glorify God as a custodian. I'm a teacher. That's good, but your job is to exalt Jesus Christ while you're a teacher. That's why we're here. It was 150 years ago, the American Missionary Society sent a group of missionaries to a part of the world where they'd never been, to Assam, India. They were pagan. They were killing each other, tribe after tribe fighting each other. A missionary got into a rough area and met a couple and led that man and his wife and 2 boys to Christ. Their lives were getting changed. They began to share their testimony with other tribal members. The chief got upset about it. He ran that missionary off, but he couldn't seem to kill the faith of that family in Jesus Christ. And he had him brought before all the village, and he said to the man, I want you to denounce your faith. We don't want that white man's religion in here about some kind of a Jew that lived 2,000 years ago. Will you denounce your faith? If you don't, we'll kill your 2 boys. What are you going to do? And the man on the spot said, I've decided to follow Jesus. What? He said, I've decided to follow Jesus. No turning back, no turning back. They shot those boys full of arrows, and while they lay twitching on the ground, he turned to that man and he said, now what do you have to say? Your wife dies next. You're going to denounce your faith. He said, is there anybody in our village here that wants to join with him and die too? Nobody moved. And he started to say, though no one joins me, yet I will follow. Though no one joins me, yet I will follow. No turning back, no turning back. They shot his wife. And he turned to that man, are you going to deny him now? And he said, the cross before me, the world behind me, no turning back. No turning back, and they killed him. A few nights later, in the darkness of the night, that Indian chief woke up all of his village, and he said to them, any family that would die for their faith in a man that lived 2,000 years ago that was named Jesus, there must be something real about him. And I've decided also to follow Jesus. And the entire village followed the chief and decided to follow Jesus. And those words that that man shared was put into the English language and developed into a great song that we sing from time to time. I have decided to follow Jesus. You're here this morning. May I ask you, what is your decision? Is it to follow Jesus? No turning back, no turning back. The world behind me, all the addictions behind me, the sinful life behind me, all the junk and stuff that's been in my life, it's behind me, and the cross is before me. I have decided to follow Jesus. Not half-heartedly, but wholeheartedly.